Welcome to the Rig Doctor podcast, where I'm giving out remedies to soothe your ailing tone and fix your sick pedalboard. I'm your host, Mason Marangella, aka the Rig Doctor. I've been building rigs for over a decade for many of the industry's top pros, and now I'm giving away all my secrets to DIYers just like you. I'm giving away all my tips, tricks, resources, and easy hacks that I've learned over the years so you too can build a rig just like a pro. In today's episode, I'm bringing on my good friend, Tony Lowe. Tony is been one of my guitar playing companions, gear hound companions for years and years. We've bought and sold to each other multiple different iconic amplifiers, from vintage Tweed Deluxes to high-end boutique and custom shop Fenders and Gibsons. And Tony used to work at a vintage guitar store for many years in Ohio and is now back in Ohio as a full-time college student, going back in his old age of 42. And we're talking about the new John Mayer single and some of the similarities between a lot of the 80s era Clapton tones from Behind the Sun and Journeyman, and how those might line up. Now, Tony and I are in two different positions as far as John Mayer is concerned. I am a super fan. I love his work. I love his tones. I love his guitar playing. And Tony is somebody that is a little bit more hesitant to give his full endorsement. So today you're going to hear sort of two opposing points of view. You're going to hear where we kind of feel like John Mayer kind of sits in that arc with Clapton and some of the greats. We get into a little bit of the Grateful Dead and a few other topics, but really the focus and the meat of the conversation today is all about the new single, the new album, and maybe we'll get to explore this a little bit more once the actual full album comes out, Sob Rock, in the middle of July. So I'm excited to see that. Tony's probably less excited, but you're going to get to hear our conversation here. And if you want to support this podcast, you can do so by sharing it on social media, subscribing to our podcast on wherever it is that you're listening to it, or following us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. We always put out notifications there of new podcasts. You can also support us financially by purchasing one of my products, Vertex Effects, from an authorized dealer, or becoming one of our Patreon members, or subscribing over on therigdr.com. We have memberships as low as $4.99 a month that give you exclusive access to private live streams, Q&As, exclusive deals and discounts on Vertex products, as well as our materials and accessories that we sell for pedal boards. You can also pay for personalized one-on-one phone and email consultations with me, the Rig Doctor. This could be as in-depth as troubleshooting your pedal board with me in real time, to me advising you on the best way to build your next rig. And I don't want money to be anything that stands between you and great tone. So if you can't afford any of our membership options, you can always email us at info@vertexeffects.com or info@therigdr.com and request a free account. It's all anonymous. Nobody knows who's got a free account, who's got a regular account. So feel free to do that. No questions asked. We grant 100% of the requests for free accounts. So please do that. And I also want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Blue Microphones and Diodario, and our friends at True Tone, for all making this possible and giving us some great items for giveaways every week when we do our giveaways on our live streams on Fridays. So definitely check out the quality stuff from Blue Microphones, True Tone, making great power supplies, and also our friends at Diodario, best strings in the business. Let's do it. John Mayer's new album with Tony Lowe. So Mr. Tony Lowe.
How you doing?
Good. It's good to reunite. The original intent of the podcast was always to have you as a regular recurring guest or even co-host. So to get the band back together is good. And it's nice to have somebody that can be a sounding board for some of the opinions and things like that I have, and that we're different from each other in a lot of ways in our musical tastes and preferences, but we align where it's most important in the love in collecting and in usage of great guitars and amplifiers and pedals. So good to have you back.
All tones are welcome here.
All tones are welcome.
In this house, we believe in solder. We believe in tone, in amps.
I should get a flag for the front of the house that's like a soldering iron.
I love you got your deontological positions, my friend. Whenever someone brings up, I was laughing so hard when you had Joey Landreth on, and he mentioned wet, dry, wet, and I could just imagine you like, yes, talk about it. It was so funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of I have a lot of triggers, I guess.
Yeah, it's
when it
great
comes
though.
to.
I love it about you because I have my stuff and we have total opposite things. So can I kick this off asking you a question about your own?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, because you get to interview people, but you've been playing more and more in the Rig Doctor videos. More and more guitar.
Only out of necessity, because throughout the pandemic, it's been more difficult to get accessed or get people to agree. I think now it's a little easier, but yeah, I've out of necessity and the regularity that we shoot videos have had to step in.
Yeah, well, what I was gonna say though is I've been really enjoying your playing. You've been doing a lot of kind of what I think of as somewhere between a Curtis Mayfield and a Cornell Dupree and a Pop Staples, kind of these neat little 6 and 9 chordal things, and it's really cool, man. You've got like a neat little style going over there.
Wow. Well, I don't know that anybody's ever paid me a compliment like that as a guitar player. So I appreciate that, and I'm working on not stepping on people's compliments, because usually a lot of us are prone to like get a gift and then destroy it in front of the person that gave it to you.
Well, when they're interfacing with you, they're thinking in terms of tech and questions and advice and tone. And you're also hanging out with like the greatest guitar players walking the stone. So, what do you want? You're not going to get a lot of people blowing smoke when you're hanging with that crew.
Right. Yeah, it can be sometimes disconcerting when you get near guys that are that expert at their instrument, and you just want to throw in the towel.
Yeah, so my question is, what have been your discoveries in the Mason guitar journey? Do you have any, before we get into a topic, do you have any personal fun gear that you've been playing, or maybe just musical ideas, or what's going on in the world of Mason's guitar?
Well, I've really been rediscovering a lot of older amplifiers that I haven't really used. And when we first got our showroom in LA, one of the intents that I had was that we really wanted to have like a full-fledged studio optimized only for guitar players. If you were any other musician, you would hate our studio, but if you were a guitar player, you would love to track in our studio. And so my intent is that we would get all the major food groups of instruments and amplifiers.
I remember you were asking me what were the food groups.
Yeah, and I was kind of trying to narrow it down to somewhere between 8 and 10 amps and cabinets that would sort of go alongside those, so that we could utilize my head switcher that was in the studio rack, that was, the same one that Tim Pierce uses, where you can switch multiple heads into multiple cabinets. And so we could have a static setup, Blue microphones set us up with a bunch of really great mics. And we love, surprisingly, like one of their cheapest mics is such a good one. It's the Encore 100i. And so we set up all these cabinets. I got all the heads, from the, Mesa Boogie Mark II C+, to, the right revision, I forget which one it was, like version F, dual rectifier, to a Soldano, to, 60s Fender Twin, a Tweed, original Tweed Deluxe. I got that the late 50s Tweed Deluxe. And anyway, all the stuff, the Marshall, the hand-wired Marshall from the late 60s, and a JMP 50, all the stuff that you'd want. So we kind of had everything. Even for a while, we had a Dumble in there that eventually got picked up by its owner. But for a little while, we had a Dumble in there. And so in a nice Vox AC30, an old Vox AC30. So we kind of had everything that, of all the major food groups that you would want to be able to have it. The problem is that for demos, they were so impractical because nobody would really play a vintage Marshall to demo a pedal or, a 59 Tweed Deluxe. And so it kind of became a little bit inappropriate, even though we had this great setup. It became inappropriate to use those amps, and what happened is they just kind of sat there.
Yeah, well, send them to me, by the way.
Right.
I just send them on over.
It's on the way. But in any case, what was cool about it is that, they had sat for a while, and when the pandemic hit, we weren't originally able to have more than, because of the complex that the studio is in, we weren't allowed to have any more than one person in there at a time. And so it became impractical to have all these amps. So a lot of them I brought home with me from LA and just thought, well, maybe I'll use them more here. And I ended up actually sort of like rediscovering a lot of these amps and like what I really love about a Vox, or what I really love about a Marshall, or what I really love about a Mesa Boogie Mark II C+. And so the one I've been playing, this is a scenic route to get us to the point where I'm saying that I love the Mark II C+. I think it is one of the most versatile channel switching amps that's ever been made. And the fact that it was made right around the time that I was born in the 80s, is kind of amazing that it's such a great amp that has a great clean channel, has a great overdriven channel, had an effects loop that was buffered. It had all these things that we talk about now, like, that isn't even standard now, but they had it on this amp in the 80s. So I'm really impressed with this amp. I really like it.
That's fun. Yeah, that's exactly the opposite of an amp that I would want. But what's great about it is that it makes sense. Like, it's not, I think that you and I could actually play together just fine. You know what I mean? And I think that's great because it's like, I think it's fascinating that two people have completely different visions about what they want their experience to be playing an instrument. I wouldn't want the experience of playing through that amplifier, and yet the art would be compatible in some kind of way. You know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't sound like what I would do by myself or what you would sound like by yourself, but that us playing together would have a sound. And it just goes to show, like, people would do better to choose tools based on what seems like a logical, pragmatic workspace for them sonically, and what works for them versus what's the thing to get. Because what I mean is, it's not like everyone's clamoring to get a 2C. You know what I mean? Like, no, they are. Sure. Who are the fans? I mean, I get that. But what I'm saying is, it's not like every man and his dog has a super reverb and a tube screamer and but I guess what I'm trying to say is, it works for you and it has all your stuff you need.
Well, I think that I would say that, like, if I were just going to choose one amp to have as a desert island, it probably wouldn't be this amp. But what I could, by playing with it, I could see why it has such a loyal fan base, and why there are Facebook groups with 30,000 members that are just dedicated to one amp, and you're not allowed to post anything else except Mark II C+ related stuff. And if you post about a Mark III, then you're out. Like, there's a group of people that are dedicated to this in a way that I can see what the allure was, and I can see why especially it was so attractive at the time that it was released.
Yeah.
I mean,
when I played
it's really special.
When I played in my weird kind of art rock band, a long time ago, my first band that got anywhere was called Junior Electric, and my best friend in that band, Jeff, R.I.P., he played through a Mark I, and he had a 335, And if I plugged into that same amp, I couldn't get it to sound like anything. And he always, and he didn't like fuss with the knobs a lot or anything. He just intuitively felt that amp. And it, you know, the people that love him just love him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that this is a kind of an allegory to what gear is in different people's hands. And I think it's a really interesting phenomenon when people say, well, you know, I'm going to get the same gear as player X so that I sound like player X.
Yeah.
Not realizing that, you know, what a Mark II C+ might sound like in my hands is what a 5E3 Tweed Deluxe sounds like in your hands. Like, it can be pretty dissimilar stuff that may get us to the same place with whatever our approach is with our right hand heaviness and our, you know, how hard we press on the strings and how fat our fingers are, how much skin contact is against the string versus not, you know, all these factors.
Well, that's why your homeboy, sorry, I'm interrupting you. Your homeboy, Marvin, who's the guy? Danny
Rabin. Yeah.
That's why what he said was one of the smartest things anybody said on this podcast, which is he talked about string gauge and heavy strings. And I think it was in the context of the Stevie Ray thing. But now you have all these people saying, oh, little strings do this and big strings do that. And he's got it right. He was talking about attack and tension. So the way he talked about the effect of the strings, this is just an example of one factor of tone. So we can apply this to anything. But the way, how hard you're smacking the string, how low do you have it tuned, how long is the scale length, of course, all these things. But, you know, big fat strings and a light attack has a sound. Big fat strings whacking them has a sound. It has a sound clean. It has a sound dirty, etc., etc. And, you know, you can say smart things like, you know, skinny strings will push you in more of a direction where you have a kind of a fizzier, expanded upper harmonics, you know, and a bigger string is going to be more about the fundamental of the note, you know. And I think the extreme example of the big strings would be like a Kimmock, like a Steve Kimmock kind of guy who just gets these big, non-flappy notes that are just very rich and big and fundamental and clean. If you're Hendrix and you got a lot of hair on your amp and you want that kind of frazzy thing, you can tune it real low and light strings and you know,
it's kind of unimaginable to have something. I mean, I know his is kind of a hybrid set, but having something akin to maybe a 9, you know, a set of 9s tuned a half step down, it must have just been so slinky.
And I don't even know, man. Nobody knows what the heck was on. I take it all with a grain of salt. And we have to remember, too, that we're talking about a time when it was a wild, and that's the other thing, is I like to think of gear and sounds. This will be a good transition into our topics, probably. I think of these things in context of their moment. So it was radical to have to have skinny strings or round wounds at one point. You know, this was a wild move. And, you know, James Burton, he didn't have super slinkies to buy. He had banjo strings to buy. And then move them over one gauge and try to make them work. You know, that's why Ernie Ball's slinkies are called slinkies. Because it was like, hey, we're going to make a string that's slinky. You know, that's the whole thing. You know, that's the whole marketing ploy and novel idea. And so for Hendrix, you know, it was probably a lot to do with whatever little bendable string I can get on here that'll be workable for me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he was sitting around auditioning all the different 9 gauge strings or 9 versus 9.5. And I think he just tuned down because he had it cranked and it sounded super bad when he played Machine Gun and hit that low, almost D flat. That's so wild.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a vibe to Strats tuned a half step down. I mean, I always have a Strat that's tuned a half step down because it's just a vibe.
By the way, is my camera backwards? Do my Strats look left-handed?
No, they look normal.
Okay. On my screen, everything's backwards. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, they look normal.
Nobody asked, but I've been texting you about this, and it could be a fun topic for your audience.
Okay.
So my fun toys are these guys that I've become now the latest victim of the cult.
Oh yeah, the Centura and I don't know, whatever you want to call the other one.
This one that I swear is a Klon. Like when it's not. It's this is some kind of really illegal counterfeit. I'm told. However, to purchase it required 2 middlemen and a whole lot of secrecy.
Right.
And mystery. So
right. If you're listening to this, you're seeing Tony hold up some Klon looking enclosure, and I don't know I don't know if you can see it, but it's not this, because everybody uses the Centura enclosure box. Yeah.
This is more rounded. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah. No, I can see it. And is it that guy? What's the back look like? Let's see the back.
All it's missing is the little sticker.
Right. Yeah.
So it opens with a quarter. Let me see. I wonder if I can open it. Well, I'm not going to open it because I don't have a quarter in my pocket. But
That's okay.
I will tell you though, the insides are totally different. Like what the Centura looks like and what this looks like, because it has. You know how the Klons, I don't even know what this is called, but it's got those gray, like ribbony looking.
Yeah, it's got the ribbon wires, yeah.
This has all of that. It's exactly like.
Did they put the epoxy on it?
No.
Okay.
Actually, I can't remember. I should look. I forget if it was gooped or not. But when I opened it up, I was looking online at gut shots of Klons and Klon clones, and I was like, oh my God, this is like. I feel like I might have bought a stolen Klon. I feel a little weird about it. It's really Klon-y. It's real Klon-y in there.
Well, I think pretty much at this point the X factor on those has pretty much been identified and revealed, and so there's a lot of really high quality replicas of it out there for sure.
Yeah, and if anyone is curious, because I've been on this Klon rabbit hole lately, they're all fine. Yeah. They're all fine. I love this the counterfeit one is my favorite one, but we're splitting hairs here.
Well, I think also you can attribute, some of these differences even between different versions of Klons. I have some friends that own a few of them, and like this one sounds a lot different than these other two, or the silver one sounds better than the gold, or whatever it is. So I think that there's certainly differences between Klons as there are between manufacturers of replicas of them.
Yeah, my other favorite one of the different things I tried was the Mythos Mjolnir Wildwood edition.
And
it had a different thing. When you turned up the gain, you could hear that it had a kind of a tougher sounding mid range to it.
Mm-hmm.
Not a bumpy mid range, but just like a high. Hi, my name's Mjolnir. Had like a to it, and that one's great. But it just aesthetically, there's nothing like that original Klon. I like a big pedal that looks like it is part of a Greek sculpture.
Certainly, a lot of his costs, speaking from manufacturer, was in the casting of that enclosure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was spending some money on that.
Okay, so Mason, you had a couple of topics you sent me, and one of them made me laugh extremely hard because you're like, let's talk about John Mayer again.
Well, I know it's such a trigger for you, so this This is going to help kind of normalize, after a while, after you've been worn down enough.
Well, he's really good, and now he's impersonated another great guitar player. So hey, let's talk about his impersonation of Clapton.
Well, it's interesting because not through any premeditated choice about what we were going to put out, but probably a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, we shot this video about 80s Clapton tone. And, usually when we shoot videos, we're shooting them at least a month before they ever see the light of day, sometimes more, and so that one was not at all aligned with the fact that, John Mayer was releasing, this single, but certainly it was very popular because the very tones that we were creating were very similar to what was in the single, the Last Train Home single. And it was interesting to me because of when I was born. Those Clapton era tones I knew before I knew any of the early Cream stuff, because my parents they didn't have Behind the Sun, but they had Journeyman, and then they had, of course, in the 90s, the unplugged acoustic cassette tape.
Every parent had that.
Yeah, every parent had that.
And they would play, what is it? Tears in
Heaven,
and
yeah, and Layla,
yeah.
and Layla, the acoustic version of Layla.
Yeah, the neutered Layla.
And so it was really interesting. My experience with Clapton is that I learned of the 80s, or I heard the 80s stuff first, and then worked backwards from there. But I always loved those tones. I really loved those albums, and but a lot of people hated that era of Eric Clapton. Many made that known that was what they considered to be his worst tone was in the 80s. But I think that there's something really great about it, and to me, what I mean, I don't think anybody should have been surprised about this. There was already glimpses of the Eric Clapton thing on the last album. He had a song called Helpless, and it was a very similar tone to this. Mm-hmm. So, there was some foreshadowing for sure in some of the previous albums. But I think the tone is great. I mean, I think it sounds really good. I think that certainly Clapton wasn't the first guy to do those exact licks. I mean, Clapton will tell you, that he was borrowing from, the likes of B.B. King and other blues greats that got him where he is. And, I don't know. I think that the song is good. It's got some Clapton in it. It's got some Toto in it. It's got, they got Greg Phillinganes and Lenny Castro. So bringing back some guys that, haven't, I mean, I'm sure that Greg Phillinganes was staying busy, but he probably wasn't interfacing a lot with pop, kind of pop music of artists that were kind of like, several generations after his kind of heyday.
Yeah. So here's my quick takes on, the real truth for everyone who now hates me for making fun of John Mayer. Truth is, John Mayer and I are the same age, and
really?
Yeah.
How old are you, and how old is John Mayer?
Well, I'm not a super fan, so I don't know his birthday or anything, but I'm 42 and he's right around there.
So what year were you born, Tony?
78.
78, okay. Yeah.
So I might even be
right
older, I don't know. But he I think he might be.
I'm looking it up. He was born in 77.
Okay, so about the same, but he's got a year on me.
Yeah.
And he's fantastic. I appreciate him as a pop star and as a supremely talented guitar player. I don't know that he deserves all of this like pantheon status as an innovator or anything. I think he's important to the musical landscape, and I think he plays circles around a lot of people. And I can be a fair critic of him and I can also say that I am jealous of his talent. He is a mountain of talent. So just let that be said. Okay, I'm jealous, and I it's not my thing. I'm still jealous. He's good. So there's that. Clapton,
and I think he writes great songs.
Oh yeah,
he writes great.
As a pop star, mad respect. But I think of him the way I think of, anyone of any decade that's kind of like the it person, but they earn it through talent. Like I think he earned what he has through talent. I just don't think it's as a guitar wizard. I think it's as a songwriter, as a pop smith, and he has the talent. I just don't think I know we may disagree on this. I don't see him as an innovator in the world of guitar, and that's what I champion over all other things, is the artistic daring of someone.
I don't know that I can say. I think that there's obviously his career is still going, but I think the thing that he does really well is what I think Neil Schon does really well, or did really well with Journey, and that and I'm speaking as a guitar player, not as a songwriter, is that he creates really great solos in pop music that are very melodic and diatonic. And Neil Schon, even though when you see him play now, it's just like a lot of shred, when you listen to like most Journey solos, you can you can hum a Journey melody in a solo. Like you can hum that melody. Like it's very singable. It's not overplayed. It's like really, really perfectly suited to the song, and is something that has like staying power. Like you couldn't say to somebody, hum me. I mean, this isn't a slight on somebody like a virtuosic guitar player like a Guthrie Govan, but you couldn't say to somebody, hum me a Guthrie Govan melody. Like it would be too hard to do that. That's not what he's trying to do, I don't think, in his music. But with the Neil Schon, like you can hum the Don't Stop Believing solo or something like that. Like it's, and I feel like John Mayer does a really good job of creating these melodic guitar parts that are like hooks really in and of themselves and are really great. And then I think the other thing that he does really well is he writes great songs. And so I think it's hard to find somebody that aligns on all those different points. Like you write great songs, you're a great guitar player. I mean, I don't think he's a virtuosic singer, but I think his singing is good. I mean, I also don't think Norah Jones is a virtuosic singer, but she like knows what she does and does it really well.
Yeah. I think that's a fact. He found a tone and he works it. And he works it in to different places. I will co-sign on the Journey analogy. The only place we differ on that is if I ever met some extraterrestrial civilization and they wanted to know the musical arts of the human culture, some people would get Journey out and say, this is some real tunesmithery right here. I'm hiding that under the rug and showing them something different. I could go the rest of my life and never hear another Journey song. It's all fine and good in the world of coked out 70s, 80s, or in a karaoke bar, and that is not a world that I ever need to visit. So neither world. So
right, but I mean, but I think you're unique in that. I mean, like I challenge anybody to find a wedding that doesn't have a Journey song in it, or
exactly. And that's because of the bride's mom, and that is the tyranny of our culture. So I hear you. I am gonna open. So speaking of moms, my mom has gotten me hooked on this ridiculous substance, the Diet A&W root beer. And so I'm cracking it open. My coffee's empty, my mouth is dry, and this one's for you, bub. Cheers. Yeah. Wait, can you hear it?
I think I've already told you what I think about Diet A&W. I think we've had this conversation before.
I don't know, but
to me it tastes like Pepto-Bismol.
Oh, delicious. Yeah. Sometimes I'll eat a bunch of sausages just so that I have to get the Pepto out. So I don't know. What's the problem?
those are like your breath mints.
Yeah.
Just take some Pepto-Bismol.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
okay, so now Clapton. My take on Clapton, early Clapton, I hear more Freddie King than B.B. King. For me, I hear B.B. King and Mike Bloomfield. Kind of like B.B. King's with the record player turned to a higher speed. It's kind of like how I hear Michael Bloomfield, who is my fave of the white boy blues guys. Clapton, I hear a lot more Freddie King. And then I feel like Clapton really found his own in terms of the sonic scapes in his, Blues Breakers and Cream era, because I think he was still playing like Freddie King, but with the ridiculous volume, surfing those waves of feedback and trying to make it all fit together. I think what people love about that stuff is that he's not even in control of it. I mean, he is a man who is a controlled dude, and he's standing in the tidal wave of his own noise, and surfing it and surfing all that feedback and volume, and it's a sound nobody's really played with before, so he's got it coming out. It's like, now it's a flute, now it's like a sax, now it's, oh my god, it's moving in my hands, I can't control it. But he is controlling it to a degree, and so it's exciting and powerful and dangerous. And I think that's a lot of what's lost in guitar is the actual danger. Like, amps sound good because they're cranked up and breaking up because they're not supposed to do that. That's what made rock and roll sound dangerous. Clapton was making it dangerous at another level, at a new level, more so than Chuck Berry with a tweed or whatever, kind of breaking up by accident in the studio because he's just loud, or the intentional cranking up of a Buddy Guy or a Muddy Waters or a Sonny Boy for that matter. But Clapton, had by circumstance a 100-watt Marshall, and he's blazing away. And I think that's what people are looking for in Clapton, is that element of danger. When he went to the Stratocaster and he went to, which you can understand, imagine the fatiguing nature of living in the whirlwind of life with Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce, the dynamics of those dudes, and performing under the pressure of that immense sound pressure level for years. I mean, even 1 year on the road, that would be horrible, in those arenas and stuff. So obviously he wanted to go quiet. And when he started playing the Stratocaster, through this, that 70s era, and I think he kind of found a voice, really. My favorite Clapton stuff are things that didn't make albums, but if you get on YouTube and you look at Clapton live in like 76 or 77 or, I like that stuff. And it's the stuff people dog him for, not being great. And as you said, into the 80s. But I think that's where we start to really hear an artist on the guitar have a voice. And Clapton in the Armani suits, the thing that John Mayer's chasing. Clapton playing on if you watch Lethal Weapon, you're hearing Clapton licks. All those blues licks, it's Clapton.
And David Sanborn.
That's right. Yeah, and David Sanborn on the sax. And I think you are hearing that bluesy essence of Clapton's own personal blues. I think you really are. And I'm with you on the 80s Clapton stuff. The era had its funny stuff about production, which, if you had to live through it, was difficult. Because I'm a person of the early 90s is when I became awake in music. So as someone who got it. Oh, I hear guitar now. I get it. Mm. But coming up through the 80s, it was very bubblegummy. It was a bubblegum world. Now it's all fine and good to look back at it and enjoy it as kitsch. All those chorusy, syrupy sounds of the day, they're new again, and it's fun to now throw them into a context where we can put them right up next to a gnarly sound, or whatever. But I enjoy that era of Clapton. I think there's something visceral about it I think there's something really honest about it, even though it's covered with all that shiny stuff. I think that was a place of worldly comfort, that shine, that production that Clapton was chasing. And frankly, I think the blues artists that he copied would have gone for that sound rather than the raw sound we celebrate them for, had they had that opportunity. Well, they didn't. But somebody like Clapton, with that kind of pay and that kind of audience, he did have it. And so it was really an honest, good faith expedition into a new frontier of guitar. And he brought the old traditions with him. And I think that resonates somehow. And I think that's what we hear in that music that we like, is this old school fundamental goodness of good old fashioned blues guitar, and kind of put onto a stage it never thought it would make. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
I don't know, you're probably aware of this, but you know that Phil Collins produced most of those 80s records?
Yeah, well, I like the live stuff where Phil Collins was the band behind Clapton.
Yeah. There's a lot of Phil Collins in a lot of those 80s live
I like that
performances.
Stuff.
And Nathan East, of course.
Is that the bass player?
Yeah, and then Greg Fillinganes is there a lot too, the guy that was in the most recent John Mayer Dinkle.
The bass player is like a thin black man, right?
Yeah.
I never knew his name.
He's on almost everything. He's on the Unplugged stuff,
Okay.
Playing the acoustic Yamaha bass.
Yeah, that's right. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
What was the amp for that? Was that what if you had to tell me, because this is where I don't know the gear. I only know it sounds like one of the Dyna whatever tri-stereo choruses on some of that stuff.
So I think it depends on the era, and in the video that we did where we kind of cover it, we really look more into the later 80s, and the main reason why is that there's a lot more documentation of that rig, whereas the one that he had in the earlier 80s that was a Bradshaw rig, much less is I mean, you can see some of the equipment, of course, but you don't know exactly how it's wired or whether there's anything that's, out of the ordinary. So in the early 80s, he was using Dean Markley rack amplifiers.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
I have a question. So I want to hear this part. I do. It's what I asked. But right before that, in that late 70s period that I like best, where he's with Andy Fairweather Lowe on the other guitar and such. I don't know if you know that, but there's like a famous live thing. You see it all the time. It's him doing Cocaine from that era. It's like a video, like a live video. But anyway, do you know what that would have been? Because to me, I want in my mind to think that it was his Tweed twin. But I don't know if he was using a Tweed in the late 70s or not.
I don't know what he was. I mean, there were some times I've seen in the late 70s he had a Showman, a Silverface Fender.
Yeah, I've seen the Music Man stuff a little bit, but okay. So I'm sorry, he was using.
But Andy Fairweather Lowe was playing with him throughout the 80s and 90s too. He's in some of those. Some of those videos. You
can see behind Andy Fairweather Lowe a JCM 800 and a twin. So I don't know if he's playing through both, but you hear chorus. So he might have been splitting it with a Roland.
Well, definitely in the first Clapton rig, he had a CE1, and a tri-stereo chorus, and he had the stereo Dean Markleys, which were basically like they were basically like 120 watt JCM 800s, but with reverb.
I've played through them, but they weren't those. The ones I played were smaller.
Yeah, so I mean, these were literally, I think they were, I'm looking at my rack here to kind of get my visuals. I think that they were a 4-space or a 6-space rack unit.
Wow.
So pretty heavy duty.
Oh, okay. A rack unit.
And so he had 2 of those, and I imagine just from knowing what they were doing with a lot of those amps back in the day with Bradshaw, is he would be resistively loading them and then bringing the dry through all of the racked effects. So it was basically like a big stereo system. And there was a CE1 in there. There was a tri-stereo chorus. It had a lot of the components of the standard sort of Bradshaw canon of gear in it. And somebody in one of the comments had said, "Oh, there's some detail about this in the latest Steve Lukather book, The Gospel According to Luke." So I went and I read through it, and he talks about how he kind of inspired this rig because Clapton had seen his Bradshaw switching rig. And so this was kind of an early attempt to kind of incorporate some of the things that he saw that Steve Lukather had in making something similar to that. And so he didn't go obviously into signal path specifics, but just kind of knowing how those rigs typically went in that during that time. There generally wasn't in that part of the 80s a dry center cab. It was really like they would load the amp that was the dry amp or amps, and then they would send that out the dry signal into the wet effects, and so you would have dry and everything, and so it was basically just a stereo system using studio gear. But that was what that looked like, but there's not a lot of detail on that. So I didn't detail that too much, but in the later 80s, the one that Pete Cornish had built is very detailed, or at least as detailed as anything that you could hope to get, which was using Soldano SLOs, which were kind of the new hip thing at the time, and he was using them, and a lot of the other guys that he was doing like Live Aid and stuff like that, and there was Mark Knopfler was using those SLOs.
Have you ever played through an SLO, by the way?
I have, yeah. One of my good friends, Boris Kabitsky, shout out to Boris. He had a great SLO, a purple one, and it had, the effects loop was modified by John Suhr, back in the Bradshaw days when he was working for him. So it was, that was one of the challenges to those amps. They were kind of had a really finicky effects loop. But that was a great amp. I mean, it sounded great. He was using it for really high gain, stuff, and for him, it was a great amp.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Is like, because I played through one, and I hated that amp, but only because I wanted something it didn't do. It did have a very, very kind of hi-fi clean sound, and then it had a tear your face off molten. Is the way I would describe it, was like a molten sound. And then it had kind of that in between was, this amp ain't for me, because I don't live in either of those places. So it wasn't, but it could just be that it was a model that was set up to be fierce like that.
I think they were really great at what they did. And I think for early channel switching amps for its generation was pretty unique in what it did. And there were some like small things that were sort of unusual about it, like the clean channel inverted. So it would be, out of phase with the distortion channel. But, and I think that in the diagrams and some of the write-ups, the white papers that Pete Cornish wrote about it, talked about how there needed to be a lot of modification done, because he was basically taking two preamp sections of two different Soldanos and then running those into rack effects, that were all in a parallel mixer, and then returning them back into the power amp section of those same Soldanos. And so it was again this big stereo rig that was utilizing kind of all the popular rack effects of the day, from a tri-stereo chorus to a 1210 TC unit. Had a rack compressor. It wasn't like a standard DBX that most guys would use, but it was a rack compressor.
Yeah.
And had a Leslie simulation in there. And
it's so weird. They just don't think of Clapton as having all those sounds, but I guess in that
2290, he had the 2290
in that era, I guess.
Yeah, so there was a lot of cool stuff. He had the Boss SDE 3000, so all kind of the hip stuff that you would want to have in a rack at the time. I think there was even a Yamaha. It was either a Yamaha Multi-Effects or an SPX 90. I can't remember exactly what it was. But Pete Cornish pretty well lays out everything that's in there. And that was what I thought was the unique thing, is that you could set the two amplifiers to dissimilar settings, or you could put one on the clean channel and one on the dirty channel, and then you could mix them so in parallel. And then there was like a grid on the rack that was basically a really primitive, or at the time it was probably, roughly what would have been the easiest way to do this. But there was a grid almost like, if you were playing Battleship, and the tech could override whatever setting Clapton had on the pedal board. Cause there was like a pedal board in front of him that was just switches and labels that would correspond to the rack in the back.
Right.
And Clapton had a grid on his that was kind of, I guess, each foot switch represented an individual effect, and then there was a wah. And then secondly, from that, the tech had the rack in the back that had the same grid. So the tech could like pull out a pin, move it somewhere else in the grid, and it could trigger a different thing in the Clapton rig if he needed it to, because he had a wireless system at that point. So if he was out on the ego ramp or something like that, he could trigger it for him. So if for the time it was fairly sophisticated.
It's sophisticated. All that for a guy that probably is happiest with a low-powered twin and a cord.
Yeah. Yeah, so, it was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool rig, and definitely, if you haven't watched the video, you should check it out. We basically used two dynamic distortions as our sort of faux SLO.
Yeah, no, I do remember
in parallel.
This. I did see that. I apologize.
Yeah, and we got really close, I think, to those sounds.
Sound pretty good, and then lately, man, you're doing a real good job of making this people curious about the dynamic distortion. Joey Landreth gave it a heck of a pitch as a secret weapon.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you this, unless you want to talk more about Clapton, but so how does this translate into, because Mayer he's kind of in the videos, and I saw the video for the song, and it looked like he's dusting off some of his amps from recent past. I think he had like a Fender and a 2-Rock, right?
Yeah, Well, I think in the video, I think it was a Soldano. He still had on there. He did have a Soldano, but I think in the live performance, which these are all they're not tracked at Kimmel's place. They're tracked at their rehearsal space. Yeah. They video him there. He had I think it was like a 2-Rock, a Vibroverb, and a steel string stinger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, it must be hard for him to find a tone. I mean, having to play through these amps, these terrible amps.
Right. Yeah.
Oh.
I'm still with you though. My favorite 2-Rock was the Emerald Pro.
Yeah, so my old Emerald 50, man, that sucker was great.
I had the, I think 2-Rock is pretty well kind of made a really solid comeback to kind of where its former glory was during kind of the Premier Builders Guild era. They took a few shots, and kind of got away from their core essence. And I've said this many times that I used to take guitar lessons at Zone Music, and Bill Crenard had a little hi-fi repair shop in that complex. And so, I mean, I was there when the original K&M designs were, being shown in Zone Music, which was a small little guitar shop that was right next to where I would take guitar lessons as a kid.
He built mine, by the way. Mine was hand built by Bill. Yeah, and because it had goop on it actually, and he signed it. He signed it, Bill Crenard, in a gold Sharpie.
Nice. Well, there was one about 10 years ago, and I had this buddy, Mark Hawley. He worked as a manager of a Guitar Center, and there was a 100-watt Emerald Pro that came into Guitar Center in San Jose, and he said, "Hey man, you might want to pick this thing up. We've got it priced at $1,800 or something like that. Head and cab, 100-watt Emerald Pro." Yeah. And I was like, yeah, like I don't really need that. Like I got good clean amps, I got good Fenders, like, I don't really need it. And it was there for like 6 months. And eventually somebody bought it, but I kind of regret now that I didn't go and get it because I really like that. I mean, not that the new ones aren't great, but I really love that era of Two Rock.
Yeah. I don't keep a lot of stuff. That's why you have so many of my amps.
Right.
Yeah, like half of Mason's amps are like amps that Tony should have kept. Is kind of like how it works. But
Justin Derrico's got that super reverb right now, by the way, that he's just borrowing.
It was weird because it was that screwed up head, but when I had tubes in it and had it rocking, it was great.
Yeah, he was doing some stuff for the, because he plays guitar for The Voice as well as for Pink, and he had to do some sort of like bluesy strat thing for one of the finales for one of the artists that made it.
Yeah,
and he had traded, and I really wish he had told me this because I would have bought the amp from him. He traded a 64 deluxe reverb for a 66 super reverb in cash.
Oh man.
From Imperial Vintage in the Valley. And I think he overpaid on the super in terms of its value relative to the deluxe, because we know how much deluxes are going for now, and you can get a super for a song.
Yeah, you can.
But anyway, he brought it back, and it had all the original cool stuff on it, and it didn't have the Jensens, but it was all original. And I have my head, that's the one that you sold me, and then I have Kendrick black frame 410 and a Carry Wright Dumble style cabinet.
Are they the Kendricks with the little trumpet shaped cone? Have you looked at them?
No, I haven't, but they're the ones that I'd bought them a long time ago because Michael Landau had said to me, he's like, "Oh, this is the best 10-inch speaker for a super. Like, you got to get the Kendrick black frame, And so I'd bought 4 of them if at any point I ever got a super reverb, because I think I found them on Craigslist or something, like 4 brand new ones in maybe the late 2010s.
They sound good, man.
Or the late 2000s. Yeah. So anyway, I had bought them for like $180,
Yeah.
and so I was just like keeping them around until I needed them. But I put them in this Carry Wright cab, and man, Justin was like, "This thing sounds so much better than my super. Like, it murders my super." So I think there's some video of him at some place, if you can watch reruns of older The Voice finals. There's that super reverb is somewhere on the stage there with him.
That's hilarious. I ever tell you what I bought? Yeah. How much I paid for that?
How much?
Okay, so I was at the Columbus Guitar Show, and it walked through the door apparently, and one of the dealers, you know how it is, they snag it right away. They just buy stuff. So it's a super reverb in a Bandmaster reverb head cabinet. It didn't have any tubes in it or anything. And the guy took it to his booth, and I said, "What do you want for that?" Because I figured I could do something with it, And he just didn't feel like doing anything. He didn't feel like putting tubes in it. He didn't feel like whatever. And I don't know what he bought it from. Maybe the guy just gave it to him as part of a trade and said, "I don't know if it works," or something. Because the guy hadn't even tested it. I bought it for $100. So just think, like, that's the even if it doesn't work, you're getting the transformers out of there and everything.
Yeah. And I think I bought it for you for like a couple hundred.
Yeah, I let it go.
300 or 400.
Yeah. But that's because you're my friend.
Well, and remember, it was at Skip's. Is it Skip Simmons?
Yeah, man, my dude, Skip.
Yeah, it was at Skip Simmons' place, and he had like forgot. Like, I called him up and I said, "Hey, I bought this amp from my friend Tony, but I've never seen it, because he says that you've had it for repair, that you just guys never figured out what you were gonna do with it."
That's right.
And I think I was up in like I think I was driving like back from Tahoe or something like that, and so he was on the way back, and I picked it up from him.
I love him so much.
Yeah, he met me out like on this like country road. It's like kind of like out from his house.
That's
he's like I tested it and I know that it works. He's like, but it needs tubes and all that stuff. So yeah,
I had some big old 7581s, I think, in it. It was so loud. They were Philips, like these NOS, big, huge, industrial looking things. It sounded great.
I bet they did. Yeah, I had a bunch of old RCAs that I put in there. So it sounds pretty killer, but I need to get it back from Justin because I think he's liking it too much.
Oh, it's a great, yeah, man. I mean, what? Yeah. I don't remember what I was gonna say. There was something else. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter. What do you? Something we're in. Is there anything else about John Mayer?
or Eric Clapton?
Yeah, either.
Well, I just have to say that I'm excited to see the album come out and hopefully it does well, and it seems like this is, from what I've heard of it, it's going to be a much more kind of pop album that's going to resemble maybe something that would have come out in the 80s. And a lot of this stuff also Don is involved in it, and that he was certainly had some great hits in the 80s with Bonnie Raitt and like Nick of Time, I think was
that's
the second Bonnie Raitt album that he did.
She's so terrific, by the way.
Yeah, she is great. And that album is, my parents also had Nick of Time on cassette. So I listened to that a lot as a kid.
I like her rawer stuff, the earlier stuff. But Don,
After Little Feat.
Right, Don is great. I like the Bob Dylan record he did, and I can't remember which. There might even have been a few, but it's the one that's got like "Don't Fall Apart on Me Tonight." Anyway, it's a good record.
Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't I guess I should have known this, but I didn't realize Don was playing for the bass for Dead & Co.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that either.
I kind of always thought, I mean, like, I wasn't following it that close. I always kind of presumed like, oh yeah, they'd have Phil Lesh, like there, but I guess that it's not Phil Lesh.
That the Dead & Company thing, that's actually where I started, where I came around to publicly say, okay, John Mayer's pretty great.
Yeah.
Because that's not a money move, man. That was something you do if you love music. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, all right, I get it. You're not just a shill. Like, you actually have something to say. And he says a lot on his guitar in that gig, man. He's not just doing a John Mayer thing. He's doing a deep dive into the musicality of the Dead. And it's funny because I don't really dig the Dead too much for my own listening, and I don't listen to John Mayer. But I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for what the Dead brought to the table, music in the musical universe, and I thought it was his playing in it is as selfless as any playing is in the Grateful Dead. You know what I mean? He's part of that collective, and it's respectable.
Yeah, I think in terms of like if you wanted something that was really going to push you to grow as a guitar player, jumping into something like the Grateful Dead that is so dissimilar from anything that he had done up until that point, like I have to think that as a guitar player, it would be like learning another language and having sort of all the benefits and assets that would come with that, the way that it would push you and maybe force you to see things differently or interpret things differently, or how to connect different chords or things like that, because Jerry Garcia's playing is really like, it's very like chromatic and like not a lot of sustain and it's so like individual that sound.
Yeah. And even John Mayer's critics wouldn't have faulted him, or like they would fault him just because his critics, people like me, are always going to fault him for one thing or another. But they wouldn't have faulted him for just leaning back and being John Mayer in a surprise context and just kind of wailing away over top. But he didn't do that. he really did become a member of the Dead. And he didn't just play parts like Jerry Garcia or whatever either. He played the role of Jerry Garcia. Does that make sense? Like he sought to do the job of being in that band. And that's like, he didn't have to do that. You know what I mean? Like he literally could have just, like when speaking of Clapton, when Clapton sat in with Wynton Marsalis's crew, what is that university? Jazz at Lincoln Center. So if you watch Clapton playing with the band at Jazz at Lincoln Center, it's cool and everything, and they're all nodding along because they're playing a blues. But man, Clapton's just kind of like, here's my Clapton, that's all I have, like here's what it is. And it's not bad, it's good. But Mayer didn't do that. He said, it would be like showing up and really being part of that Jazz at Lincoln Center orchestra. You know what I mean? Like he actually, he towed the line. So it was cool.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think that I think it's interesting to see what it'll do next. And I think that this will be a cool album for the summer.
Yeah.
I'll send you a copy, Tony.
Hey, I should ask you, it looks like we've been on for like an hour. I don't know how much you can go. We need to do this we were going to talk about the Pedal movie, and I don't know if we're going to, we could only barely scratch the surface.
Right. Well, I don't know if we want to wrap this one and then we can either, I basically have until about 11:30. Our live stream starts at 11:30, so I could probably go like up to that point or so, like maybe 5 minutes before. If you think that 45-ish minutes would be enough to cover it, and then we could just make that a separate episode. Or if you would rather stop now and then we could schedule something now for next week and then dedicate that just to the Pedal movie.
I think we do another one that's just the Pedal movie.
And just do that next week?
Yeah.
Or do that now?
Do it next week. Just because I actually had to... This is like in the center of the day.
Yeah.
I do want to say a couple of things. By the way, what I meant by that for the listeners, Mason and I are in different time zones. And... I'm actually a full-time college student, so I'm fitting this in between other stuff. So that's what I mean. I can't dedicate the whole afternoon, sadly. But what I think is when we're done taping, I just want to make sure we're actually scheduling something.
Yeah. I think probably we'll cut like where we kind of ended the Mayer conversation for this purpose.
Oh yeah.
So if we want to do kind of like a closeout now, we can do that part. And then we'll stop recording and then we can schedule for next week.
Yeah.
For the Pedal movie one.
Well, can I do a pitch for my album?
Yeah, so let's resume our conversation, Hunter. This is where we'll come back in to kind of wrap up.
So, by the time this is out, this video or podcast or whatever, so will be my album. So, to Mason and to you all watching, I'm Tony because we're friends, but I make music too. And you can find that under the name Anthony Michael Lowe, anywhere you download music. So, my first time doing this through DistroKid, but if you do a digital download, supposedly you'll be able to pay whatever you want. So however much or however little you feel like donating to a starving artist, you'll get a record. And a reason you might appreciate it is that it's totally old school, recorded to tape, using tape echoes, using all tube preamps, everything, and just a Stratocaster and a cord and my Fender reverb unit and a Brown Deluxe, and then there's like a couple other little amps. There's a 63 black panel Fender Deluxe and like an old Tweed era like Dan Electro with a great big 15-inch Alnico Jensen. So I'm just plugging into some old amps, but you're never hearing effects except for tape echo added after the fact. So that's fun. And there's instrumental stuff, and there's songs, and it's all kinds of, there's like Afro-Cuban stuff, there's kind of pop stuff, I sing, and it's hopefully good. So check it out.
Yeah, I can say, I mean, you've kind of, been keeping me a little up to date as you've been going, but I think it'll be cool. And Tony is a really great guitar player, and I think what I especially appreciate is the great tones that you get with this simple setup. Like I would never have the courage to play with it and as abbreviated setup as you have, especially for a recording. I need to be insulated with the soupiness of all my effects.
I get that. I mean, yeah. I do use a lot of reverb. But
so did Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yeah. Well, the world needs, like look what Jim Campolongo does with a Telecaster and a Princeton reverb. Nobody ever plays a Stratocaster just plugged into an amp. And so hopefully this record can be something like that. You know what I mean? I know it sounds funny, but for super fans of the Stratocaster, we have nowhere to go. Everybody's always using pedals. And it's a great sound, just a Strat and a cranked amp. It's like in the 50s when they saw Stratocasters, they thought it was a spaceship, and I'm trying to fly that ship. I'm trying to fly that thing. So, little brown panel Fender Deluxe and a reverb tank, man. And
was this the same one that I picked up for you in San Francisco?
Yeah, it's the one you picked up. It's the better sounding one of the Brown Deluxes I've had. And just the reverb tank is a reissue with a good pan in it, but it's it's just that amp, man, cranked up. And you've heard it.
Nice.
You've heard it. Yeah. It gets fierce. It's not like what you think. It's not Mark Knopfler's Stratocaster.
No. Yeah, this has got some meat to it.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, Tony, any final thoughts on Eric Clapton, John Mayer, the new record, your record, before we complete today?
No, just remember that the best artists are tormented and weird, and no matter what idiot things your favorite guitar players say, just judge them by their guitar playing, and you'll learn to love Clapton. The guy shouldn't talk, but he should play his guitar.
We're all fallible in the end.
Ain't that the truth? I like the mad ones.
Yeah. All right, Tony. Well, until next time, we will complete for today. So that was our chat on John Mayer. You can see we have very opposing points of view, although I think Tony's coming around a little bit. I think I'm getting him a little bit more in the zone with John Mayer. But that was a lot of fun. I really dig it. If you want to leave us a comment, if you want to leave us a review, we'd love for you to do that. It helps out the podcast tremendously. Or if you're watching this or listening to it on YouTube, definitely throw us a comment and a thumbs up. We definitely appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody behind the scenes for making it happen today with this podcast, Hunter Harrison for editing and mixing, Mason Mejia for co-producing the podcast, and Tim Marco for creating all the music that you hear that insulates the intro and outro of every single podcast. Until next time, I'm Mason Marangella, the Rig Doctor. Adios.